Hello and welcome to Mandibil, and a Merry New Year to you and your loved ones, and welcome to a new year of deconstructing Stefan Molyneux videos. Apparently, he seems to still be kicking around with his ethics. For some reason, his holy grail of philosophy, which he apparently found some 15 years ago, is quite hard for people to get their head around. Nobody seems to use his ethics or what it entails, the ethics he has done. And people asking questions and keep sort of trying to figure out what he's actually trying to say. And he keeps in some ways, he repeats the same arguments, yet he tries to take them on from a different angle now and then. I mean, okay, that could be sort of a sign of trying to figure out the best way to enlighten people on his thinking. But it might also be a sign of desperation that no matter what he does, whatever core arguments are in the ethics is not going to work, right? Or they are just inherently bad, non-functional, or there's something deeply wrong somewhere, right? In my opinion, it shouldn't be hard to understand what you're talking about. It should be sort of, yeah, when you read it like, an ordinary person who's not well versed in ethics or philosophy or terms used in philosophy, still they should be able to follow it step by step and see, yeah, this sounds right, this follows from this, and so on and so on and so on, until some kind of more principle that sort of falls out of all the previous philosophy, right? There might be a need for axioms and definitions, and so where you say, well, this is what I'm going with. You can't prove, metaphysics. It's just when you're doing metaphysics, you are ransacking your own mind, or what's it called? You only have your own mind to go with, right? Because trusting somebody else telling you how your mind works, in that attempt, you are using your mind to understand or to let somebody else telling you how your mind works, right? But if you don't know how the mind works, how can you use that mind to figure out what other people are saying about how the mind works? So metaphysics is a very solemn kind of philosophy. And in my opinion, that goes for epistemology also, right? It's only when we get to, say, objectivity that we can start to talk about, okay, now we are bringing in other people, right? We have to have objectivity about objects or experiences in order to figure out how we deal with them. If we disagree about them, well, then we can't plan anything, right? So the closer you get to morality, the closer you get to the point where you can start to sort of debate with other people. In my opinion, you should basically have your own treatise of philosophy, which you arrived at. You can get inspired by other philosophers, of course. Yeah, to say, that's a good, interesting point. That's important. I need to take care of that, and so on, right? But basically, you have to figure it out for yourself. Nobody can tell you what you should think. Anything else is stupid, right? Because if you're saying, basically, I have to let other people tell me what to think, and my mind, which I'm using in order to understand what they're saying, it's not sufficient for me to do it myself, but it's sufficient for me to understand what other people have come up with, and I'm going to accept that as my philosophy. That's fucking stupid, right? So in the end, it's that there are a lot of problems with philosophy, mostly because philosophy has been shanghaied by academia, and now it's only those who have the right parchment from their rulers who can claim to be any kind of philosophers. Anybody else is sort of looked down upon as a stupid idiot, something like that, right? And that goes strictly against any ideal of sort of any, what's the word I'm looking for? Any so any attempt at any communal understanding of philosophy, right? It's like anybody should be able to do it. What's so magical about those brains who are going out telling, I'm a philosopher, you're not a philosopher because you don't have the parchment? That's also kind of stupid, right? So there are all sorts of problems with philosophy, and basically, I would say it has been that way for possibly all through the ages, right? And but whenever somebody comes in and rattle the spook philosophy, those are the guys who are not sort of educated but have their own approach, right? There's Spinoza and Kierkegaard and Hume and Nietzsche and they couldn't help it, right? And those are the guys usually who brings new things to the table, and all the old academic dustiness rattles it. Wittgenstein maybe, right? So it's appreciative when somebody ordinary attempts philosophy, and that's why I have the approach that, well, my philosophy is as good as anybody else's philosophy. I'm not going to let anybody else tell me that I can't philosophize. That doesn't mean whatever I'm coming up with is just perfect because I came up with it. But I have to come up with it. I have to come up with something that is my philosophy. Otherwise, I'm just eating raw what somebody else says, right? And that's also one of the problems with Stefan Molyneux, channel or community or whatever label you want to stick on it, right? That it's mostly about what he thinks, right? And this example here, I've listened to this video a couple of times, and it's like he's the cult leader, right? Who has seen the little peons in the discussion forum somewhere asking questions about his UPB, and now he has to come in and sort of clarify, you need to understand it this way, you stupid idiots, right? It's not explicit like that, but it's sort of between the lines, right? He's not encouraging people to think for themselves. He is sort of more like this sort of cult figure that, or priest, or something like that, who tells people how it is. And if they don't understand it, well, they're just on the wrong path, because his path is the right path, right? He understands it. So they are just sort of idiots who can't understand his big thinking, right? It apparently doesn't occur to him that it could be possible that he might be wrong somewhere, right? There might be some contradictions or problems or holes or something lacking in his arguments for ethics, which is actually, to a very, very, very large extent, the problem with his ethics. It's shittily argued, right? And go listen to my full or my deconstruction of the part 1 of his book called Universally Preferable Behavior, or UPB in short, where I deconstruct his whole argument for how he gets to a moral framework, an ethical framework. I think all these terms also sort of he equivocates now and again. And now it's called ethics. Other times it's called morality. Sometimes he calls it virtue, and then he uses his own, which is called UPB. And it sort of floats around, right? So he grabs the term he needs at the point when he needs it, apparently. So apparently on his forum, some guys or girls have discussed UPB yet again, right? Which is a sign that it doesn't work, right? It's a sign that it doesn't work. If people constantly discuss the same thing over and over and over again, right? And he fails to get people to say, oh, yes, of course, man, of course it's obvious if this follows this and follows this, right? And it is basically the same argument he uses over and over again, right? So let's head into it and see how it goes, right? Let me see if I can. He at some point here he mentions that people are using words to convince you rather than looking at the real world, something like that, right? I'm paraphrasing. And he spends, words and words and words and words again and again and again and again to explain how he gets to this kind of reality. He can never get to that reality he's trying to get to, because there's something deeply flawed in his approach to this ethical system, right? It actually doesn't allow him to go to reality. He's cut himself off from reality. So, but I'll get into that later.
So I just noticed a couple of things in UPB conversations, just as a sort of browsing past some of the various chat forums. And there are a couple of tips that I wanted to give. It's not really specific to UPB. I'm happy to take questions. But the tips that I wanted to give, it's not that people are...
Give. Why does he say it like that? Give. It's just sort of... Why does he phrase it like that? It sounds manipulative to me, right? It's just a small thing, but I never say, well, it's a small thing, right? It was like, okay, why does he say it that way, right? It's not the normal way to express it. So he changes it for some reason, right? There must be a reason why he changes it. It's sort of magic spells, it's kind of, this is the rabbit I'm going to pull out of the hat, sort of magical spells or something like that, right? If you get my drift, okay.
Debating in bad faith in a way.
Oh, debating in bad faith. Oh, so whenever somebody tries to argue with you or debate with you and they don't agree with you, it's because they have some kind of bad faith. There's something wrong with them. They're out to get you. They're there to attack you, right? Well, if there's something that doesn't work in your ethics, which might be something you could look into after 15 years of not getting anybody to understand this and saying, well, hey, Stefan Molyneux, I've used this for a couple of years. It just, it works like, like a dream, right? Nobody does that. He explains it and people say, well, yeah, I guess that he's got to something, but I'm not sure what the hell I should do when I'm standing out there in the field and there's a cow. What should I do? But Stefan Molyneux says it has to be universal and it has to be non-contradictory. Okay, but the cow is there. I'm here. There's a field. What do I do? Right? Is it self-contradictory? I don't know. Is it a cow? If I say that's not a cow, am I self-contradictory? Yes, you are, because if you're experiencing cow, but then it's not contradictory, it's just a false, or the proposition is false. There's nothing wrong with the proposition, there's nothing wrong with the cow, but it's a false proposition. Or the comparison between the cow and the proposition is false to you. Is it contradictory? No, it's just a false proposition. Is it universal? Well, I've never been on this field before. Or not in this exact spot, with this exact cow position, and this field, and this grass, and this whatever weather, right? I've never been in this situation before, right? Is it universal? How the fuck should I know, man, right? I don't care if it's universal. I want to have some kind of principle I can apply to the situation so I can figure out how to stay on the moral side of things, right?
But when people have emotional tension or hostility
hostility, they're so hostile. It's not because they try to argue with you the best they can against the a professional sophist. No. It's because they have they have a grudge. They are coming to they just want to pull you down because they don't want any kind of ethics. They want to be nihilists and they want to destroy your perfect world, right? It's the same old bullshit story, every time. It's like, if you don't agree with me, you're out to get me. And you're Mr. out of the argument, right? And I never hear you argue. I only hear you talk about how great you are yourself, how perfect your moral system is, or how perfect your books are. In fact, a bit later in this video. I don't think I'm going that far into it. It's sort of 1.5 hour long, and it's only about the first 20 minutes where he specifically talks about UPB and ethics, and then a sort of all sorts of call-ins that are not that interesting. But then he keeps talking about himself, and then he talks about this novel that he wrote some years ago, and he had just published again or whatever, right? Or published himself, you could say, called Almost or Revolutions. I'm not even sure. I think it's Almost, but you know. And he says he believes it's one of the greatest novels ever written. I mean, he has to publish it himself, right? Apparently people told him it was a great book, but they didn't want to publish it, right? Why the hell didn't they want to publish it if it was so great, right? So it's sort of it's a subjective stance. It's subjective understanding of what is good and what isn't good. But then he says, well, you have to have some objective standard for when something is good and something good art and bad art. But it apparently only deals with somebody else's art, which he can deal with and tell you whether or not it's good or bad art. But his art is always good, right? It's so grand and beautiful and perfect. It's one of the greatest novels ever written. Nobody has ever heard of it. Nobody wanted to publish it. But apparently, nobody understands how great he is, right? That's a sign of megalomania, right? So, a megalomaniac cannot see constructive criticism. He's unable to identify it because he's so wedded to his own thinking and ideas and philosophy and whatever that he can only see it as an attack because he's perfect, right? He's so great. So they just don't get it. They're too stupid, right? Either they're stupid or they are deliberately going to pull him down, no matter if he's right or wrong. They just have this fetish of getting him, right? It's not like they can argue for themselves or anything like that, or at least attempt to do it, right? No. They're just out to get him, right? Because he's perfect.
Adding a particular proposition. What they'll try and do, it's unconscious. I don't blame them for it, and I understand why they do it. But what they do is if the argument threatens them, and I mean, one of the wild things about UPB for me.
The argument threatens them? Is he projecting his own psychology into this? It's like, the Danish saying was every a thief thinks everybody steals, right? So you are thinking that about everybody else, which is your own thinking. It's sort of a Freudian kind of slip or something like that, right? If you're a thief, you are very aware that, there are possibly thieves around because he's in that mindset, right? So when he says, what was the exact, I have to just...
Is that I viewed it as an absolute godsend, almost literally, because it gave me...
Can listen to again, but something like it's their sort of their psychology is like they want to, they are hell-bent on, pulling down, right? Nobody seems to be able to argue with him, right? Or he can't see anybody able to argue anything with him, right? He can't identify a decent argument. And also, I think that he's sort of projecting his own psychology into other people and sort of attacking those as if it was his own way. He sees his own approach in somebody else, no matter how they do it. He sees that his sort of sophistic approach to things is also that he thinks that everybody has the same approach, right? So, or everybody is out to get him, right? So, and he thinks he has to go in and say, well, hey, I saw some of you, my little peons, were discussing UPB once again in my forum. And I saw, and those people who are, they have psychology, bad psychology, and, right? It's just over and over and over and over again. It's the same weird paranoia, sort of, right? It's paranoid in a way, you can say, right? It's just, it's not a sign of a decent, open, sort of embracing philosopher who listens to the argument, right? And maybe one of the problems with this UPB shit is that it's so badly argued from the side of Stefan Molyneux. So when people try to argue against him or try to find flaws in it, it's hard to point out the flaws because in the first place, it's so shittily argued, right? So it's hard to point out what the problem is because you're trying to point to some shit and say that is shit, right? I don't know how to exactly put it, but if it was very rigid and very, concise and so on, it would be an axiom here and an axiom there and so on, and first principles and so on. It would be so much easier to go in and say, I think there's a problem there. And that's what Stefan Molyneux would want if he was a decent philosopher, right? For the second or the third or the fourth revision of his book about ethics. But he hasn't revised it for 15 years. Apparently version 1 is still standing, so it must be perfect, right? I don't buy that at all, right? Whenever I get to publish my book, hopefully within a couple of years, but, not too far out in the future, right? I am already at that point preparing version 2, right? I will be listening to any kind of criticism, right? Any criticism. Good, bad, whatever, right? Even the worst kind of criticism might point out some weakness or badly argued or, and maybe I have to make book number 2 and say, don't go read my book number 1. It was stupid. I didn't understand what I was doing, right? And here's a better version of what I was thinking, right? So something like that. No. He wrote the book, right? He wrote it and now it's done, right? And basically his approach to how to understand what morality is, he's saying, well, I have studied philosophy so long, so I don't need to tell anybody that murder is wrong. I'm not going to run around proving that murder is wrong because everybody knows that. Okay? That's the level of argumentation for morality in this book, right? So go listen to my deconstruction to get an idea how ridiculously bad it is, right? And it doesn't get any easier to understand what he's saying here. It just points out how difficult it is to understand what he's saying. And an important point is that something that is hard to understand, in my opinion, you should reject. Because if you can't understand it perfectly, crystally clear, or to a very large extent to say, I am pretty certain or sure, I don't like the term certainty, but sure that this is on the right track. There might be some adjustments here and there, but generally it's on the right track, right? Nobody should have any problems with that. But he keep repeating the same arguments over and over and over again, and people keep asking, well, how should I understand this? It might point out that it doesn't work, right? He says he keep clinging to this, that's all he has. He has his argument for, these apparent 2 things that he can argue, and this is all it is, right? That's all he has. And if that is destroyed, he has nothing, basically, right? Okay.
An understanding of morality that I just didn't have before, and I would argue that the world didn't have before. And of course, because when you...
Yeah, because you found the Holy Grail, right? You were Jesus descending from your electrified jello, telling the world, I found the Holy Grail, go little peons, right? Follow my edict. And then people say, Okay, great, but could you explain this bit for me? I'm not sure I understand. No, you're out to get me, right? No, I'm not out to get you. I actually want to understand what you're saying and how I, apply it to my everyday. No. It has to be universal. It has to be, you must not contradict your own statements. And okay, but, how do I approach it in my everyday? Well, you're an edgelord, right? You're finding some situation. You're an edgelord. You're out to get me. Get out of my sight, right? And it has basically been that way for 15 years, right?
You are dying of thirst in a desert, and you think, oh my gosh, I found a well, I found an oasis, I was happy as a guy. And then other people are just taking they look equally thirsty to me, but they take a deep pee splash into the oasis thus.
Yeah, so it's an analogy or metaphor for him thinking he has found the Holy Grail, and people don't just accept it, right? They don't. They are trying to argue against it. How dare they? They are pissing on my Picasso, right? I mean, come on, man. You can't just, descend from the skies and present the 10 commandments, and this is what you do. And there isn't actually any commandments either, right? They're just, if you argue against me, you prove I'm right, and you can't be contradictory, otherwise you're not scientific, or, something along those lines. And people are like, okay, yeah, it sounds like you might be onto something, but I'm not sure how to use that in my everyday, right? So it's just like, he's living in the clouds, right?
Trying to spoil the water, it seems a little incomprehensible to me. And that which was really a kind of salvation for me turned into, often became kind of like a curse for others. And it took me a while to sort of understand how UPB does threaten entrenched power structures. Entrenched power structures with regards to mysticism and with regards to democracy and with regards to the state as a whole and parental authority and so on. Universality is the opposite of hierarchy, right? Hierarchy is when you have the rulers have rules that they can follow, and then the opposite rules apply to those they rule over. That's really the essence of rulership, is exception and opposition to the rules you impose. That's what power is, right? In excluding yourself and having the opposite rules for yourself, excluding yourself from the general rules. So universality has a huge impact, and UPB has a huge impact. And most times when things have a very big impact, people tend to avoid them because they can't wrestle with them. It's too big a thing to handle. And so they just...
Universality is an idea, right? There is the best understanding, the best term I can put on it, right? It's like universality is if a rule is supposed to be in place here, it should always also be in place over there, right? Is the individuals interacting and individuals interacting, rule here, same rule over here, right? Yes, but it's still just an idea. It's not something that is anywhere, right? Unless you have found out some way to, cognize more rules for some reason, right? Which is impossible in my opinion. And one of the things David Hume points out, right? Yes, but it's not that good intentions and great ideas are enough to work in your everyday. There needs to be some kind of principle you attach to your situation, actually in perpetuity, constantly, to make sure that you do not end up in an immoral situation, right? And figuring out what it means to be immoral at the same time as you have reaching a principle that makes sure you don't end up there. That's the goal of philosophy or of ethics, in my opinion, right? Then that's the goal. It's not saying it should be universal. I don't believe in that kind of universality, right? If a guy and a girl can get together and they can beat each other's ass with a whip, okay, fine. I'm not going to say, okay, because you like it, it has to be universalized, so I have to get whipped in my ass. I don't want that, right? You can only trust me, right? But I'm not into that kind of stuff, right? So it's like, I don't want to universalize that, right? So no, but I'm sure that Stefan Molyneux would also understand this, what I'm trying to get at here. But so what is actually the universality of it, right? Is it immoral because it's somebody else that those who agreed onto it, right? Right? Is it the agreement that is the part of it, or what? How does that function, right? It's not like, well, you can't make a universal rule that says you cannot beat somebody in the ass, right? If somebody else says, I want you to beat my ass, and I want to beat somebody's ass, right? And we can get to an agreement, I can get to beat that fucking ass, right? Or that person can get his or her ass beaten, right? If that's what they want. But and then it gets into this sort of, well, if you want it, then it isn't or is. But I can't know what somebody else wants. I don't have access to their wants or not wants, right? So that's the problem. You can't know whether or not people want it or not, right? And if you do something to them and they didn't want it, well, then it's too late, right? Then it's too late. You want to stay on that side, right? Before you find out whether or not they want it, if you haven't agreed to it. But if you have agreed to it, well, then where's the morality in it then? Does morality just sort of dissipates into the ether or whatever, right? And these are sort of those fluffiness of his ethics that is not resolved. But I'm not saying that beating somebody's ass is sort of an everyday scenario, but you can find something that was more sort of common maybe, right? If I'm going down to the store and I'm buying some fruits and some vegetables, can I touch all the vegetables to figure out whether or not exactly that's the vegetable I want, and all the fruits and so on? Can I touch them all, or can I only touch a few, or should I just grab one without touching them, or can I rub them against my cheek, or can I put them in my ass crack, or whatever, right? Where's the delineation, right? Where's the universality? Where are the contradictory statements and all this you're going for, right? It's not there. It isn't there in your everyday situations, right?
Just avoid it. And then, though, if UPB kind of chases them down and tickles them, then what they'll do often, and I've sort of seen this happening a number of times, is they will come and they will attempt to, and I can feel this emotional energy. I know that's not an argument.
Oh, he's a psychic. Okay, he's a psychic. He can, I can feel between the, when they put their fingers to the keyboard, the way they do it, I can feel their psychology. They want to come and get me. They want to, they want to impress me. They want to, dig into my brain and destroy my philosophy, right? It's like, I can feel what they're trying to do. Oh, I'm psychic, right? Bullshit.
Argument. I'm aware that's not, I'm just telling you my sort of personal experience. There's a kind of claustrophobic squid intestine complication to UPB. I don't know if you've seen this coming on, where people are, they come up with really wild edge cases and
no. Yeah, you're always bringing in the idiots, right? Who say, hey, if you're hanging from a flagpole above, 13 children, and have a plastic bag of coconuts, should you let the coconuts go to not fall from and you will kill the babies, and all this kind of edge. But those are not the good arguments, right? Why don't you bring in those who can actually make some decent argument? Why are you always bringing in those ridiculous arguments? You are trying to frame it as if everybody is arguing this way, right? You take out all the idiots. That's why you always debate communists and not anarchists, right? Because communists are sufficiently idiotic. So you can always say, look how idiotic everybody, are, right? So it's like, you are bringing out, the most idiotic, most stupid argument and saying, this is how everybody argues, right? And then you can, this sheen you can put on everything to make your acolytes think that nobody can actually argue against you, right?
And demand that you objectively solve this. They avoid the central argument of UPB. They question.
Well, I can tell you, I don't avoid it, right? I dig so deep into it, and I find nothing except, hot air, right? In my deconstruction of UPB, part 11, which is almost like something like 10 hours into the deconstruction, I go in deep to his core argument, his first argument for why he thinks his framework for ethics is called UPB, which is valid, or whatever term you want to use, right? It's so ridiculously badly argued, it's not even an argument, right? It's called part 11, the syllogism from hell. And then you can see, how I try to transpose what he says into a more easily understandable syllogism, where I use a swan, a white swan, right? Swans, this is a swan, all swans are white, therefore this swan is white. This is, the syllogism, right? You can go listen, right? All swans are white. This is a swan, therefore it's white. It's sort of syllogistic structure, right? And you have to transpose it or transform it, transcribe it into this kind of standard syllogism in order to see how badly argued it is, because he's not actually creating a syllogism. It's an incorrect kind of syllogism, right? It uses the words, but what it points at, right? If he says glagolags are bubble up, right? This is a glagolag, therefore it's a bubble up. You would say, what the hell are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with the syllogism. It's a correct syllogism, but the content of the syllogism is complete nonsense, right? And that's the problem with the syllogism from hell, as I call it, right? It's so ridiculous, right? You can also see a part of it in part 10 and maybe also in part 12 of my deconstruction of UPB, but particularly part 11 goes into deep with this ridiculous syllogism, right?
Any kind of universally preferable behavior while putting forward statements of their own that confirm it, and then they will ask you to explain it. They will ask you to unpack it, and then as you're trying to do so, I don't know if you remember, there was a guy I was trying to explain something to, and he kept interrupting me a week or two ago, and I just had to.
Oh yeah, I deconstructed that one also. He kept interrupting you. No, he didn't. You talk for 45 minutes, and a couple of times you ask him about how does it make sense to you, this? And then he says, well, yeah, but I'm not sure about this. And then you stop him and say, no. You can't attack my argument. You should shut up and listen, sort of guy. Oh, he kept interrupting you. He kept interrupting you every 20 minutes, right? When you asked him for a response, right? It's ridiculous, right? No, you should just accept what Stefan Molyneux, the wise philosopher, the sage, right? The modern sage. He knows everything, and if you don't just sit down and fucking listen to him, you're out to destroy his ethics.
Say, look, just try and be patient as I sort of work through this argument. And that throwing of sand in the face, in a sense,